For today's video, I'm going to be walking you through the current build of an Elusives deck that I've been playing on the ladder, and I'm going to explain each of the different cards individually because I've been getting requests for that. Again, people are still learning the game, and then once I've went through the deck, I'm going to include one game as a gameplay example as well. Now, Elusives are pretty popular on the ladder right now, and I'm not surprised by that because if you play Magic the Gathering, you understand how important evasion is. In Magic, it's traditionally flying, but historically there's been other things like shadow and so on and so forth. But the idea is pretty simple. If you can attack and your opponent is unable to block you, that's a free source of damage, and that's very valuable. Elusive units can only be blocked by other elusive units. So this deck is designed in many ways to take advantage of that, but also to try to combat other elusive decks just in case you run into the mirror, and or to slow other decks down in terms of outpacing their tempo. Because one of the things you have to understand about elusives, generally stat per cost is lower with an elusive card than another just regular card of the same cost. What I mean by that is that you might pay 3 mana to have something attack for 2 with elusive, or even 4 mana to have something that attacks for 2 in elusive, when you could be paying 4 to attack for 3 damage, 4 damage, 5 damage with a normal creature. So in order to offset that, you need tools in your kit to help you kind of win the race. You have to slow your opponent down while getting your free damage in, and then you have to have other things that protect your elusives and so on and so forth. So now that I've kind of glossed over the high level concept, we'll just go through the cards and hopefully it'll start to make sense. Fleet Feather Tracker. If you have watched my other videos, you know this is one of my favorite cards in Demacia. I think it's one of the better one-drops in the game. It's outstanding. Specifically, however, in this list, you really want to take advantage of the Challenger to attack into opposing elusives when you're playing the mirror to get rid of them while not having to waste your own. So an elusive can block an elusive, and in a pinch when you're in the mirror, sometimes that's the right thing to do, but anytime that you can get rid of an opposing elusive while preserving yours, that's going to put you a bit ahead. So this, because you can give it Challenger, it's very cheap, and it has that 2 attack power. This means that it can trade into things like Shadow Assassin or Green Glade Duo, and so on and so forth. So this is a very powerful one-drop in this list. It also turns on Dawn Speakers that we'll get to in a moment, but Tracker is one of our one-drops, and it's pretty solid. Inspiring Mentor. This is the other one-drop that we run. This just buffs an ally in hand, but because it's a one-drop, you can play it early, and then you can use it to buff one of your elusives. It's very important because, again, most of your elusives are going to be a little bit lower in stats compared to other followers, other minions. And as such, you need a way to protect them from removal. This is one of the ways you can do it, being able to buff something above, the 2 damage threshold, the 3 damage threshold. This is a great way to do it. Now, the other reason this card is important is because of that tempo factor I was talking about. So when you're trying to race somebody and you're getting your free damage in, you're attacking for 4 or 5 a turn with elusive that they can't block, chances are they're attacking you each turn for more. So being able to use this 1/1 to block opposing threats that don't have overwhelm just means you're slowing them down. The thing about tempo is you only need to slow them down. You don't have to hard stop things. You just need to make it so that you are racing their health total faster than they are racing yours. Using this 1/1 as a nice cheap blocker, if it soaks 4 damage or 5 damage, that's great. 1 Radiant Strike. This is just a combat trick. Can help you win trades, can be used to get one of your elusives outside of potential removal range at times, things like that. The fact that its burst speed is important because that means it cannot be interrupted by an opposing deny, which is pretty powerful. All right, 2 drops. Green Glade Duo. This is pretty straightforward. We run it because it's got elusive. The 2/1 stat line for 2 is not great, but elusive is totally worth it. And the additional, when you summon an ally, give me +1/+0 this round. That matters as well, just because you want to push as much damage as possible with your elusives. Because, again, a lot of these games at least in my experience so far with this deck, are going to be very close, and you're just looking for that little bit of an edge, that little bit of a push, so that you beat your opponent before they find a way to deal with your shifty elusive bodies. Next up, we have Navarre Conspirator. This is a 3/2 with elusive. Now, traditionally, it has a drawback here to play me Recall an Ally. And, of course, I'm going to have notifications go off while I'm recording. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Now, this drawback is, in many ways, sometimes a plus, because you get to, for example, replay Inspiring Mentor. So you can get an additional buff from that regard. Later on, we're going to be covering some cards like Laurent Blade Keeper, which has a really good comes into play effect as well. And then some of your more expensive elusive units have, slightly higher health totals at 3. So sometimes they can take 1 or 2 damage, and then you can bounce them back. And then when you replay them, they kind of heal. Similarly, there's the Laurent Protege in here that has Challenger and a 4 health. So being able to get 1 attack in, trade, and then bounce it to replay it before it dies. There's just a lot of ways that you can use the Conspirator as a positive. And obviously it's got elusive, so that's a bonus to your deck as well. And so this is the other 2-drop. Now as we go to 3-drops, Dawn Speakers. This is not as powerful in this deck as it is in something like Dawn Spiders, because you have so many sacrifice effects in the Dawn Spiders list. However, the number of Challenger units you have here increases the potency of Dawn Speakers. Also, whenever you're chump blocking with Mentor, you're going to get a trigger as well, and it becomes a double-edged sword for your opponent, because they need to race you. But if they're gonna run into this Mentor and also trigger Dawn Speakers, and you've got, even just 1, but sometimes 2 or 3 elusives on the board, that's a lot of additional damage potentially coming their way. So this is a really interesting card in this list. It can act as a deterrent. It can certainly help keep your elusives alive, making sure that they stay out of range of those Mystic Shots of Avalanche, out of Get Excited or the Spear. So this is a very, powerful and interesting inclusion. It just doesn't snowball the same way as Dawn Spiders, but do not underestimate the power of this card in this list. Next up, we have Deny. This is almost entirely just to protect your elusives. You get 1 or 2 down. If you're coming from Magic the Gathering, it's very similar to playing Simic Flash or old Mono Blue Tempo. You play 1 or 2 threats, and then in Magic you use just straight up counter spells to protect them. In this list, Deny is the only option that exists in the game in that realm, so that's what we use, along with some fast effect buff spells, etc. But that's what this is really for. You want to target board sweepers, you want to stop those avalanches, you want to stop ruination. Sometimes it's great to stop a vengeance. It is also worth noting that there are some spells you cannot stop, and learning which ones to play around in that regard is pretty important. Things like Harsh Winds, when you're playing against Freljord Shadow Isles control, because it's burst, you cannot stop Harsh Winds. So if you're expecting it, have a plan. But again, Deny is very important, very powerful in this list. Fiora. Fiora is the only champion I run, and ironically, it has nothing to do with trying to win with her. If you win with her by accident, okay, fine. Because there are enough buff effects in here where sometimes that happens. But for the most part, this is just removal. This is just a 3-cost, 3/3 Challenger. Because as Challenger, it can trade very nicely into opposing elusives. Because it, again, has the effect that it has. Sometimes it can be just enough of a deterrent where your opponent does not want to attack into you. So it's all about playing that tempo game. If they've got a 1/1 or a 2/2, they don't want to give you a free kill on Fiora, fearing that you might use her to win. They might not attack you, and then as a result, that's just 1 more turn where you got damage in, hopefully with elusives, while they were not getting any counter attack damage in on you, and that matters. So we run 3 Fiora as a deterrent, as removal, and just to kind of play with opponents' heads. It's also one of those interesting things where if they're not familiar with the list, they might prioritize killing Fiora over your elusives. Sometimes players see Fiora and they, because they've lost to her before, they overvalue her and spend removal there. So overall, she's really just a disruption tool. She's a heavy disruption tool in this list, but it's pretty effective. Next up, we have Laurent Protege. This is basically a 4th Fiora. The fact that he has 2 attack and 4 health makes him very resilient. Challenger is a plus. Sometimes against opposing elusives, this can be a 2-for-1 if you trade into 1 elusive, survive, trade into 1 the next turn. It's a great card to bounce with the conspirator, as I said before, because as Challenger, when you do finally trade into something and this dies, it's going to potentially be a source of a trigger for your Dawn Speakers as well. So overall, just pretty solid card. 3 Shadow Assassins. This is really straightforward. It's got elusive and it draws a card. If I have to explain beyond those 2 things, we have a problem already. Standalone. This is as a 1-of. I like this for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it helps protect your elusives or potentially makes your Fiora huge, which then makes people panic. But also, it has burst. Now, you have to have exactly 1 ally, which is a bit niche, which is why I only run 1, but there are times where this has been incredibly powerful. And again, burst is really, really important. So I currently include it as a 1-of. Speaking of targets for standalone, Kinku Knife Blade. This is a 2/3 with elusive and lifesteal. This is very, very powerful in this list. Do not underestimate this card. Yes, it's a 4 cost for a measly 2/3, but the lifesteal is huge, and with so many buff effects, you can oftentimes use that lifesteal to help you win races, not just against elusive, but against other aggressive lists as well. For example, against a Dawn Spiders list, the minute you get this outside of their removal range, so if you give this even just 1 more health, it can become a very annoying card for them to deal with because it's free health every turn, and they can't stop it, they can't block it, and the more you buff it, so like if this is the only card on your board and you hit it with a standalone, then you've got a 5/6 that you're swinging with every time you get the chance to attack. You're gaining 5 health. It is really, really powerful. Again, it's one of those cards that looks unassuming, right? Because it has such a low stat line, but the keywords that it has are so powerful that they really do offset the lower stat line for the cost. Laurent Blade Keeper. This should be pretty straightforward. This gives you a body and it buffs something, so you want to buff your elusives. One of the things I want to give you as a tip is you don't want to buff 1 unit super high because then you run the risk of, being hit with a detain or a vengeance or something. So try to spread them out. Even more importantly, you also want to kind of spread them out to accommodate for playing around cards like Rasa, playing around cards like Avalanche or other mass removal. So, if you've got 1 elusive that's already got 3 health and you have another one that's below, you want to buff the one that's below against Avalanche decks. I mean, it's pretty common sense stuff, but it can be tempting to make 1 unit super strong, but all it takes is 1 removal, or even just at a key moment 1 frostbite effect, and you're going to wish that you had spread them around. This is also a nice card because, much like the Mentor, it's going to also serve as a way that you can speed bump traditional units, right? So Mentor, you play, it buffs hopefully an elusive, you use it to block. Blade Keeper is basically the exact same thing. Blade Keeper is something that you want to use to block. The fact that it only has 2 attack, as weird as it sounds, is a bit of a boon, because oftentimes when you play this, you're buffing an elusive, so it's going to be higher than this. And that means that if they do have a Rasa effect, he kind of protects your other elusives in your buffed units from Rasa in that regard. It's a very interesting interaction, but very powerful. This is also a great target for your Conspirator to bounce back. Pretty straightforward inclusion in the deck because it's so versatile. Silverwing Scout. This is like Lifeblade. It is a 4-cost 2/3, but it has elusive and another keyword. In this instance, it's tough. Tough is not as valuable as the lifesteal, but don't underestimate it. It makes the card very resilient, especially against damage effects, against things like Avalanche. This also means that you can be a little more forthcoming with your blocking with this card. So if you're in a very tight game and you need to block another unit, this is more likely to survive, especially if it's got a buff or 2 on it. So it is, it is what it is, right? It's an elusive unit with additional keywords, so we play it. I run One Wheel of Ionia because it can be the make or break in some games when you're trying to win a race. So slowing down an opponent's heavy hitter, getting rid of a potential blocker. Specifically where I find this powerful is when you're in a tight race if they do have something with elusive, or maybe they just have, you know, one blocker and you've got a couple of non-elusive units on the board, playing this at the end of a round where they don't have enough mana to replay whatever you bounced, and then setting yourself up for an open attack on the following round can be very, very strong. Overall, this is, again, just a tempo card, but I do include it as a one of, as kind of like a silver bullet answer to things at times. And then lastly is back-to-back. So if you've heard me talk about this card in the past, you know I'm a big fan. It's incredibly powerful. 5 mana for a potential 6 damage is huge. Also protects your units from direct damage, sources of removal. The fact that it has burst means it cannot be answered by deny. So again, very powerful, especially in mirror matches. Overall, solid card, perfect top end for a list like this. And that's it. So very elusive, heavy game plan. And then where you're not playing elusives, you're either trying to protect them with buffs, or you're trying to run things like challenger units to serve as your removal. And that's it. So now that I've said this, I'm going to go play one game on the ladder so you can see the deck in action, get an example of how it works, and we're going to do that now. All right, so we are jumping into a game against what is likely a Shadow Isles Noxus aggressive list. I see Elise and Katarina, both solid aggressive cards. And then Darius is likely the top end. And this is fine. We are attacking on the evens, which is also interesting because we are going to have to make the decision about whether or not we lead with Mentor to buff our elusive or not.
They won't get past me.
And I think that the answer is actually going to be no. Because we're against an aggressive list, we want to be able to block this and trade in with it.
I'll do better this time.
We're fine with this. We'll trade 1 for 1. We'll just get our 2 damage in on our round with the elusive. And then we don't have to commit to this Radon 3. We can go with something like Mentor buffing this and then also playing that and then playing this on the following turn. Though at this point, it would actually be Mentor buffing this, but regardless,
The Yordle here's with me.
we're going to go ahead and develop our elusive so we can at least start getting some damage in, or try to.
I pull the string.
One of the things we have to worry about in this matchup specifically is going to be cards like Culling Strike. Now, Elise is going to be really annoying simply because we can't really afford to let her level up. The Challenger would be a bad time for us. But we also don't have a good way to get rid of her right away. Go ahead and buff this with the lifesteal, because that's very relevant.
Reporting in.
But yeah, they are on a very aggressive list. And we're going to go ahead and develop our knife blade here. This gives us a potential blocker for Elise. But they've got the Culling Strike. So that's exactly the card that we were hoping to not run into. So that's going to be a bit of an issue.
Let's move.
So push, push. Following around is going to be another tracker into a scout in all likelihood. But the Elise is going to be a problem because with Fearsome, we don't have many ways to block. Fearsome is a bit of an underrated keyword. So we're actually going to attempt to block a spider just to keep the spider count low. And also to slow them down. Oh, they're going right in. We are way behind on the old tempo race at the moment. So here we would hope to find something like a Fiora. Back-to-back doesn't quite get us there. That only is an up to a 10, but it does mean that we'll be able to at least block Elise and potentially survive. So at this point now we're just worried about maybe additional decimates and things of the like. So we're going to push as much damage as we can.
Witness true strength. I have my orders.
Alright, that's a bit of a shame. If we still had the mana to back-to-back, I would actually just trade into the Darius. The Overwhelm is an issue. Even if we back-to-back and we block both Elise. Alright, well, let's go ahead and do this. And at least get this off the board, so that we don't have to worry about that.
They got past me.
So we're gonna have to lose one of these to soak as much as we can from the Darius, and we can block the Elise.
Noxus will rise. Strength above all.
We could use a bite.
It's just a question of whether or not we'll be able to survive the way that we want to or not. Whatever blocks the Elise also needs to soak enough to deal with the Overwhelm, so we're gonna back-to-back these two, it looks like. So this is still gonna deal us 3, 4, 5 currently. Because this needs to be assigned to 7 to die. So we would still die to a decimate. So if we block this and Radiant Strike, we would only take 3 and we still die to a decimate. So right now we cannot play around it. And since we can't play around decimate, we just have to hope they don't have it.
Silent.
So if they have it, then you know, we're just gonna have a bad time. If they don't have it, we should be able to win with an open attack on our turn, because we're gonna have 2, 4, 6. Oh, maybe not an open attack. We're gonna be 1 short even after the bounce. Two, 4, 7. Oh, after the bounce, we'll be fine. 2, 4, 7, 8. So they would need some sort of fast effect. So things that we potentially lose to would be Decimate, Culling Strike, etc., etc. Our fate is essentially in our opponent's hands. So we bounce this, because again, we want to do it with the open attack, because on the off chance that they draw a decimate, we don't want to give them an opportunity to play it. So if they don't have the decimate now, and they draw it, if we play this being greedy, and then they get to answer with playing decimate, then there's nothing we can do. So this is 100% the right path.
Strike quickly.
And we'll do it here, I guess. And then just hope that they didn't draw a Culling Strike or anything of that nature. that's it. So as I was saying during the description of the deck, right? A lot of the times when you win with this, it is a very close game. You have to have just enough tempo to outrace them. I think this was actually a great example of that. So that's the deck in action. Hopefully you found this entertaining or, I don't know, helpful. But if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if it's your first time seeing me. And remember, when you're out there playing, have a good time.